Good afternoon, MTW agencies. Today, we are thrilled to be back with you this afternoon to talk with you about impact analysis and hardship policies. Today, we've invited agencies that are both Cohort 1 and Cohort 2 agencies. So there will be plenty of opportunities for comments and questions. We are breaking it up a couple times with Mentimeter quizzes, which you're very familiar with right now, to maybe test your knowledge of our presentation and how we go. And I'm thrilled to introduce our presenters are from the MTW office. We have Tanisha Gurdon, Jennifer Rainwater, and Allison Christensen, who you are familiar with, all three of them. And then also I'm thrilled that you'll be hearing from one of our agencies of the initial 39 MTW agencies, Karen from Boulder. And so she's going to kind of talk to you about her experience as well. Really what we wanted to do today is to dive into the impact analysis and hardship policies requirements. I think you can look at these in a couple of different ways. You could look at it as just a way to provide this information because HUD's asking for it, so you gotta check the box to get it over to HUD, or better yet, you could view this information as a really important way to look at your initiatives that you're thinking about MTW. That's a way to really think through them and the impact that they may have on your agency operations and your families and things like that. So what we'll do today is first, we will kind of walk through the impact analysis, and we'll talk about some key things you might need to know. When is it required? How do you know if those activities are required? We'll talk about those 9 factors in the operations notice around the impact analysis. And like I said, you'll hear from one of the existing agencies. We'll stop, we'll take a break, we'll do a little Mentimeter test your knowledge, and then we'll come back and we will talk about hardship policies. And within that, we really want to talk about the overall process review and provide some examples and scenarios based on something that you guys should be familiar with because you did the training in advance. So with that, we're really excited about today's conversation. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tanisha to get us started on the impact analysis. Tanisha, take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. So my name is Tanisha Gurdon, and I know some of you from working with you from the Cohort 2 mailbox, so you're talking to me then. So before we jump into the requirements for the impact analysis, I'm going to go over some resources we have and tell you about some stuff you should, some key things to know before we get started. So, right, thank you. So that first screenshot is of the operations notice, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. It's your #1 source of program requirements, so always refer back to that. But we also have this very great interactive impact analysis training. If you have had a chance to look at it, it's some of the same stuff we're going to talk about today, but you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, of course. And if you haven't, please look at it. It's a really great tool. The way it asks you questions helps you to remember and really helps you think about the how. And a reminder for everybody to please mute your phones because I'm hearing some feedback right now. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So here, I will elaborate on some of these points of key things to know while you take a look at the list. But for that first one, for an impact analysis is not required annually for every activity. So just because you have to do an impact analysis prior to implementation doesn't necessarily mean you'll have to do one every year. For purposes of this training, I'll be referring to, and some other people might refer to, work requirement activities, stepped rent, and term limited activities. Sometimes we refer to those as high impact activities, and for those, an impact analysis is always required, so keep that in mind. We've talked before in previous trainings about how MTW agencies can use a combination of activities for one initiative. Marianne just mentioned that too. In those cases, you can use one impact analysis for multiple activities. And it's important to think about what impact you could have on residents when you implement any MTW activity, even if we're not requiring you to submit one. All right, we can go to the next slide now. Okay, so this table is a resource that you can use to help you kind of understand when you need an impact analysis at a glance. But before we walk through this this slide, I want to remind you of some key terms that you see here. And you might be thinking, Tanisha, you know these words, and I'm not offended if you do. That's what we want, but just in case, so we're all on the same page. MTW waivers and their associated activities are listed in Appendix 1 of the operations notice. And MTW PHAs can implement those activities as long as they're in the range of flexibility. And we call this range safe harbors. And safe harbors are the additional requirements that the MTW PHA must follow to implement the activity. And Laura, if you could, oh, she put them in there. So if you look in the chat, you'll see that those terms are there in case you need a visual. And so safe harbor waivers is a MTW PHA would make a safe harbor request if they wanted to implement an activity beyond those safe harbors. And agency-specific waivers are waiver requests for requirements that have not been contemplated by the notice. So I know that was a lot, but in about 2 slides, we have time for questions. So you can ask questions about that if you have them. But now, let's go through this table. So for the first row, MTW waivers without an impact analysis required as a safe harbor. So Laura, if you could jump to slide 11 for me real quick with that screenshot of the operations notice. So you see here on that first screenshot, you see the title, the activity name, the statutes and regulations that we waive to allow the activity, and you see safe harbors, there's a box there, and those are those additional requirements that I referred to, and you see highlighted agencies must conduct an impact analysis. So that's where you would see it. So you can go back to 9 now. Thanks. So if an impact analysis is not required to be submitted to HUD, you don't need to do an impact analysis at any point of implementation. But again, it's always best practice to think about the impact any activity you implement could have. That second line, MTW waiver where impact analysis is required. Of course, you have to do one then prior to implementation and at closeout. You may need to do it annually, but if you do, the operations notice will tell you that. For safe harbor and agency-specific waivers, an impact analysis is always required at the time of implementation and at the time of closeout. And again, if an annual impact analysis is required, we will communicate that to you. So to simplify, if you need an impact analysis prior to implementation, you need one at closeout. And if an annual impact analysis is required, HUD will indicate that either through the operations notice or through your PHA plan approval letter. Okay, next slide. That was a big one. So this is just a list of all of the activities in Appendix 1 that require impact analysis. So it's just a resource you can use because you all should have a copy of these slides. But if you don't, please contact us and we'll get them to you. Next one. We went over this a little bit, but again, that's a screenshot of the operations notice. This other screenshot is our online manual, which is another great tool. You can just click on the activity and then it'll take you to this section that you see that lets you know all of the requirements. So it's just another resource for you. But of course, the operations notice is number one, but we have great resources on our HUD Exchange site, and we'll have a list of those in the resources. So now I'm going to turn it over to, Marianne, she put her camera on. So here you go, Marianne.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. And as she said, it sounds like a lot of information. All of the information that Tanisha just provided is in the operations notice. So we're trying to just make sure that you understand the information that's in there. I see a question here about providing specific examples of safe harbors. If you go to, as Tanisha said, if you go to Appendix 1 of the MTW operations notice, that will tell you exactly what those safe harbors are for a specific activity. So thanks, Tanisha. That was a great overview. Turning it over to Jennifer to continue the conversation on impact analysis.
Hey, everybody.
If she's with, are you there? Okay, I wasn't sure if the storm knocked you out.
Yes.
Hey, Jenny.
But we're still okay. So anyway, it's
Right.
great to be here today. And as Tanisha was talking about the impact analysis and the operations notice, these are the nine factors that are discussed and in there about the pieces and the aspects of an activity or something that you're wanting to put in place as you're beginning to develop your moving to work program. And so this helps to know, like, where do I even begin? Well, a great place to begin is with these 9. And, you know, part of your consideration might be, hey, that doesn't really affect what we're trying to propose here at all. But at least you have taken it, you've looked at it and you said, oh, maybe not. But it is important to look at and see how each of the factors are applicable. You know, sometimes when I think back to when I was working on this, when I was proposing an activity, how would it affect the agency's finances? And that always felt like a really big topic. It's like, okay, well, we get a lot of money from HUD. We have a lot of money to spend. You know, hopefully we're dispersing it in an equal and equitable way. But it's also, as you're putting something forward, is it going to affect the amount of time staff take on a particular function? Is it going to change the amount of subsidy? All of those things factor into, frankly, the agency's finances. So as you think about these 8 or 9 factors, you can see that, you know, it might be a high level title to something, but it has a lot of different aspects to it that could affect your agency and what you're doing. As you go down that list, I was thinking about just thinking about the wait list itself. You know, is your wait list going to actually be moving faster because of this activity you're proposing, or is it actually going to slow it down? How is that going to happen? What's going to be the result of this thing that you're wanting to enact on your wait list? With the agency's termination rate, how will it affect your staff's responsibilities? You know, if staff are used to that or not. In my experience, a lot of people weren't terminated from the program, or a lot of people didn't leave the program. But, you know, will that affect just my day-to-day work? Thinking about occupancy in public housing or the utilization rate. If people are moving off your program faster, are you going to be able to maintain those 2 aspects? Are you going to be able to get new people moved in? Are folks coming off your wait list for an HCB voucher going to be able to find a new unit? So will what you're proposing, again, you know, have an impact? And of course, on all of these 8 factors, there's the sense of the disparate impact. Is one group of people going to be negatively affected by what you're wanting to put forward? That can come into play kind of all the way down the road. So, I mean, it's important to think about these things, and, you know, it's exciting at the beginning and you want to do it all because, you know, there have been things that we just keep tripping over in our agency, and we want to address that and for our community. But, you know, where do you start with that? How do you even begin to have that conversation? This is a great list, and I know on HUD Exchange, the training around this particular piece is excellent. It's kind of overwhelming, frankly, when you start going through that training, but it really does walk you through examples of how important each of these factors are. And I often think about it, and I apologize to all attorneys that may be on this call today. But one of the key things that I always have thought about is that it's important to know the answers before the questions come. So before pursuing or responding to a question or a challenge, it's already know the answers. And doing this will absolutely help you. Because the other piece is that, you know, line staff who are working face-to-face with families, when they get questions and challenges, you know, the knee-jerk response is, well, I have to collect this piece of information, or I need you to tell me this thing because HUD told me I have to. And in working and moving to work, they can't rely on that anymore. So helping to understand the whys and having gone through this and knowing, you know, what is going to be touched, how is something going to change, prepares you, frankly, as you move forward in implementing your program. So next slide, please. So this just leads through that. As you're thinking about what you're going to be enacting, you know, who will be assigned? Frankly, I mean, these are great questions to ask yourself. Is there going to be one person per activity, or is one person going to be managing all of it, or 3 people? Who's going to conduct that initial impact analysis? And, you know, is one impact analysis going to be in place for multiple things that you're wanting to enact? That's a possibility too. But, you know, who is this staff? What is happening? What methods or tools will you use to collect data? So in practice, again, as you're going forward and you're trying to see how things are working, are you going to use maybe the software that you already have, the system, or are you going to want to create, you know, use other tools that you have like Excel? Remembering that as you do that, then you have to make sure that staff actually fill those Excel files as you collect data. And then again, how are you going to analyze the results? I think folks in cohort 1 and 2 have a great aid being given to them in that there are actual researchers who are going to be coming in and analyzing kind of the results of what's happening. But you too want to know, maybe in a little faster manner, day to day, what's happening? Is it working the way we want it to? How often will you reassess or repeat? Tanisha kind of gave a nod to, and I'm going to come behind her and say, it's going to be really important to know what is the operations notice asking and requiring, but it's important to know beyond just because HUD told me I have to do it, to what is the actual effect of this thing that we're doing? Is it doing what we're expecting? And as I was thinking about this, one of the activities that we put in place was allowing for an owner to self-certify the repairs had been done. And the staff inspectors who were going out and were used to doing and conducting inspections absolutely hated it. They hated the fact that they thought of it as chasing paper. Landlords were not good about following up with that certification and saying, hey, yeah, we've made the repairs. They wanted to just go back and see the unit. They thought it was much faster. They could do it in a much more timely manner. They would know the answers, and it just came back to that idea of they didn't want to chase paper. So, but by reassessing and watching it and talking and listening to staff, that was part of moving to work too. You know, it's designed to be testing different ideas. And you may find that it might have worked great in the one of the other agencies, but in yours it just didn't work, and here's why. So by doing that assessment, you will know that, and you can make those determinations. What methods will you use to deliver the assessments of the results? You know, it may be that you create, if you do use Excel, to use graphics and different images to show. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. You know, so being able to show that in a very vivid thing, that's something you can post on your website, but to just show, hey, here's what we're seeing happening. It's not just because we wanted to do new or different work, but we're really seeing an effect. We're seeing people potentially move into units faster. It used to take them 3 months. Sorry, that sounds really bad. It used to take a month to move into a unit as you're coming off of the wait list, and now we've reduced it to 2 weeks. You know, what are the results that you're seeing? And then how will you respond? You're going to be doing assessments of the results. Is this an activity we want to continue doing? Is it something we want to dial back? Do we want to tweak it? So it is a great opportunity to look and see what's happening in your community, play something, see what's happening, and then keep going. Or maybe you do a modification, or maybe you eliminate it completely. So that leads into the what if you're seeing weak or even negative results. You know what, we thought this was a great idea, and it might have been a great idea, but in practice, we discovered that this really doesn't work, and here's why. So, you know, then you have the opportunity. What are you going to do? Are you going to modify it? Are you going to eliminate it? What's happening? But by doing the impact analysis and taking these steps and thinking these things through, it will help you to, when you begin to actually implement an activity, you've already thought through many of the challenges. And I would say in practice, it's much more helpful to have done that internally. Staff are a great resource in discussing, analyzing, thinking about activities. How is it going to really play? And hearing that from them and having them have the voice in that process, because they know what happens, you know, boots on the ground. They know what's happening in your community, but you've already thought through what you're going to do. And that will lead you into what Allison will be talking about later with your hardship policy. But you'll find that everything really does all sync and wrap together. So hopefully this will help you. But it's great to even have this. It feels, again, maybe HUD is prescribing what you have to do, but it's because of the lessons that have been learned already. So with that, I don't know, are there any questions? I haven't seen anything come in through the chat specifically about that or a specific aspect of the factors, but I wanted to just check and see.
So Jenny, at this point, we're opening it up for questions to see if there are any questions. So thanks, Jenny, so much for providing some of your real life experience, and you'll hear more from Karen. Just before I turn it over to Karen from Boulder, I would just like to ask if there are any questions. I do see a question in there, and Jenny, I'll send this to you. Is the impact analysis a template style form, or is this something that we can create from scratch?
I don't believe it's a template type form. It is something that you would be creating and what would work for whatever it is that you are looking at for impacts. I found most of the time I was working with Excel to put the data from the system and looking at the people on the program today or at that time to see if this was enacted and this was the change. Here are the results that would just baseline data statistically, what would be the result?
Great, thank you. And Karen may be able to touch on that as well. Other questions? If you want to put your question in the chat, just make sure to click either everyone or all panelists, or if you want to just ask a question verbally, just be sure to unmute yourself.
I have a question. This is Marnie from Salt Lake City, Utah, Housing Connect. We're in the stepped rent,
Hey,
we're in the rent reform cohort, and I was just curious, since we have a research partner involved, what that will look like as far as an annual impact analysis, and if the data that they're collecting would be something, would it be redundant, or is it something, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I see Allison is ready to answer your question.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'll point out some specifics for the stepped interior rent cohort agencies when we talk about hardship policies in particular. But these requirements of the operations notice are ones that you're still bound by, even you know, as a participating in the stepped interior rent cohort. I do agree that it's possible you might have some information from the evaluators that could be very useful in your ongoing impact analyses. So that would definitely be a great resource and place to pull data from. But you would still have to, conduct the impact analysis at the agency level for those activities.
Can I just add one more thing? The other thing that just comes to mind is you're not going to want to wait. One of the real beauties of moving to work is that you can really move in a fast and not a fast, but in a timely, efficient way. And there are moments that you're going to know, but being able to look at that information, what's happening as you're doing so, it might inform you that, ooh, we need to make a modification here. So.
Great, thank you. This next question, Tanisha, I'm going to ask you, send this your way. The question here is, does the backup data need to be submitted in the MTW supplement the backup data, I think, for the impact analysis need to be included in the MTW supplement submission?
Let's see. Can you repeat it one more time? I'm looking at it too. I see it. That's okay.
Sure. And the question is, does the backup data need to be included as part of the submission?
I'm not sure what they're referring to as backup data, but I know that the supplement does outline all the documents that are required to be submitted.
Right.
What you mean backup data?
And I'm going to go to you guys know where I'm going to my handy dandy operations notice to answer it. And so it talks about that the impact analysis has to consider the following factors. And so the impact analysis needs to demonstrate that you've considered those factors, but it doesn't go as far to require every single piece of backup information that you prepare that goes into the impact analysis. So the answer to your question, Cindy, is no, we don't need to see all of the backup information. I am going to, okay, so the next question is, and then this will be the last question here, and then I'm going to, oh, Jenny, is there you raising your hand?
Can I just add one more thing? Even though you don't have to submit that data and that information to HUD, I would strongly recommend keeping it so that you have it as a reference point, because if you get a question or a challenge, you would much more easily be able to answer it, because you're making a decision, you're putting a program together based on, here's the analysis we made and here's the decision we made and here's why. So, and in your system, I think most systems overwrite, so it's hard to go back in time. So for you personally and for your agency, I would keep it. But
and just to what Jenny's saying too, a lot of times, you never know who's going to be there in 5 years from now or later on. So it's a good practice just in general to keep those records for whoever may be conducting these in the future as well.
And I think that is a great segue into, and I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but I'm going to kind of do a little teaser of the other questions. And Karen, I think you might be able to address some of these in your part of the presentation. Right now, I would really like to introduce Karen Kurtzberg from the Boulder Housing Partners. Karen is the MTW and Federal Policy Director in Boulder. She has been with us for an MTW agency for quite some time, and can tell you, again, from her firsthand experience as well, kind of the importance of the impact analysis. She can talk about this question about the backup data and how that's important to keep at your agency level. And she can also talk about kind of the timing of doing an impact analysis and why it's important to do the impact analysis at the beginning before you actually implement your activity. And so with that, Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you, and that's for you. Please go ahead. And so, Karen, I think you are on mute.
There we go. Sorry.
There she is.
I have too many mute buttons to push. So
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I work with Boulder Housing Partners, and we have been an MTW agency since 2012. So we are now in year 11, I think it is. If you can advance to the next slide. I only have one slide. I'm going to do a lot more talking than actually just reading off the slide. So the first thing I want to say is, as an MTW agency, it's an awesome program, and it really allows us to address our local needs. HUD, HUD Section 8 program, HUD's public housing program is really a nationwide program, and as we all know, things change from county to county, state to state, city to city, coast to coast, and things are different across the country. So for us, it was really a great program because we can address what's happening locally with our current residents and participants and the applicants. The one other thing I really want to say is it's an amazing opportunity, and it provides agencies with powers, quite a bit of power actually. And in the words of Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's where the impact analysis really comes into play. The other big thing about MTW is it brings about change, and we all know that some people flat out just do not like change, right? So a few words of advice about change. Be careful about how many changes you make at once. Change fatigue is real, and it causes a lot of stress. And in this case, the pace of the change is something that you can actually control. And so I highly recommend that you control not only the pace of the change, but the stress that the change causes. Another word advice is you need to be very thoughtful about your changes, because I think Jenny had said it's no longer HUD's program. This is now your program. This is your rule, and you need to be able to really truly defend it, because before it was really great. We'd be like, oh, so sorry, it's HUD's rule, too bad. And now it's, oh, no, wait a minute, I made this rule up, so now I need to figure out why I made this rule. I need to understand it. I need to own it. And being thoughtful about that change and owning it means that you really need to understand how it's going to impact everyone involved, not just the participants and residents, but also the staff. Don't forget about finance staff, maintenance staff, and all the other departments, not just say your public housing property managers and your housing choice voucher specialists. You need to think about everybody. That also includes your partnering agencies and your commissioners. We have a very involved board of commissioners, and they love MTW. They love what we've done with it, but they also want to know the why behind it. The other piece of advice I have is to just try and get as much buy-in as possible. And I think I see something in the chat about how do you engage participants. We do a lot of brainstorming sessions. We do brainstorming sessions with staff. We just get together and talk about what rule do you not like today? And okay, can MTW change that rule? And if so, how would you like it to be changed? And then it's a matter of going back and doing that impact analysis to say, okay, if we change X, how is that going to affect Y over here? One of the ways that we reached out to our participants to engage them is we did do MTW Resident Advisory Committee meetings. That's what we call them. We invited folks in starting at 5:30 in the evening. We would offer pizza and soda. We would offer childcare. And then we'd sit and we would have a discussion about, okay, this is what we're thinking about. Tell us your thoughts. And we would go through. And the other way to engage them is because we'd have them there till about 8:30. We offered them a $25 gift card to Target for just showing up and providing us some feedback, because everybody's time is money. And so we got some really incredible feedback from some of our participants and residents that way. In a brainstorming session, we always lay the ground rule that we think outside the box. No idea is a bad idea, and everything gets put up on the board, and then whether or not it actually shakes out into something in the end is obviously up to interpretation later on and decision making. So why is it useful to do the impact analysis? It really allows you to understand the impacts and possible reactions, right? And again, you need to know the why so you can defend it. It made us really own the change, as we were the ones creating it, and it felt like it made us understand it better. The rent calculation is the example I'm going to use, and I believe the rent calculation was created under the Brooke Amendment in 1969. That is also the year I was born. I don't consider myself old, but I think the rent calculation is old. I think it is time for a change, and so those are two obvious areas where we quickly made changes for those. We also had to know in advance through the impact analysis, is it going to cost us money? Is it going to save us money in HAP expenditures? And if it's going to cost us money, how long can we afford to keep that going? Or if we're going to save money, then that could possibly open up money or resources to use in other ways. We used it after implementation to make sure that we were still on track, that the decision we made was the correct one. What did we learn from our impact analysis? We're a smaller agency, by the way. We have about 1,300 vouchers, of which only, I think there's about 926 of them are actually MTW vouchers. The rest are special purpose vouchers and such. But we set up our spreadsheet in a way so that we could plug in different variables and see, what is the impact on rent burden? What is the impact on payment standards? What is the impact on HAP expense? And then we did take into account, like Jennifer said too, just what is the impact to staff? Like when we went to triennial research, we thought, wow, this is going to be so great. We're going to be saving all this time by not processing a recert every year. The one thing we forgot about, the unintended consequence in this case, is landlords don't want to wait 3 years to have a rent increase. And so we are processing interims every year in most cases for contract rent increases, but at least we're not doing the full-on recert every 3 years. So it's one of those that we actually did not think about that ahead of time. And then after the first year, it was like, well, why are we doing all these research? Why are we touching every file every year? And it's like, oh, we get it now. So the other thing that we used the impact analysis for was to set up the percentage of gross income towards rent for our elderly households and people with disabilities. And we kind of followed the 75-25 rule, meaning that 75% of the folks were going to receive a benefit or not be affected, and 25% of the folks were going to be affected in a negative way. So it was easy to use our tool the way we set it up by plugging in a bunch of different variables. We actually set our rent is 26.5% of gross income towards rent. And it's funny because in hindsight, a lot of people have said, well, why did you pick 26.5? Why didn't you go with 26? Why didn't you go with 27? And 26 and 27 pushed us too far either way, either 80-20 or 70-30. And we wanted to stay as close to 75-25 as we could. And so we came up with the 26.5% of income towards rent. The question was up about, were there particularly useful tools or methods to collect data? A lot of the data we found was already found on the 50058 set of the information we had already collected. We did have the exception of medical expenses because we eliminated all deductions from income. And so we base it off of 26.5% of gross income. And so we no longer have the information on the medical allowances, and we didn't have that on any future families that were possibly coming onto the program. Some of the challenges we found was that it's very, very helpful to sit with your staff who process the files, who understand our families, who know the ins and outs of the actual rent calculation or the program in general, and really play out different scenarios. You need to figure out what is, take this household and play out the scenario and see what happens. Take another household, do that. We also then got really creative and thought outside of the box and said, okay, well, what about a family of this composition or this income level or this, and really tried to look forward to any unintended consequences, because the unintended consequences are going to happen, I think, no matter what, just because I think it's hard for any agency or any group of people to think through each and every aspect or every outcome or every consequence that's going to happen to an action. But the more you can think through, the better off we are. Another lesson we learned is that with the group of people that we had trying to figure out what the activity was going to look like, everybody was in it for a reason. Everybody had their own desire, be it increase housing choices or get as low of a rent burden as possible, or we actually had an opposing and said, why don't we increase rent burden so maybe we can increase the number of families we're serving. So we found that for us, it was very helpful to write up the guiding principles, because once you start having those discussions and all these crazy, wonderful, great ideas come out, you can get sidetracked very quickly and very easily unless you know exactly what it is you're trying to solve with something. Doesn't mean they can't change along the way, but if at least you have a set of guiding principles, that way when you're starting to talk and you're spinning off in all these tangents in different directions, you can then come back and go, where does that fit on the guiding principles? In retrospect, I wish we would have thought of more aspects to the rent calculation and not just how rent is calculated, but the actual overall variables that are included in the actual tenant rent. So we focused very much on total tenant payment and not so much the utility allowance. We did do a simplified utility allowance. In retrospect, I wish we would have looked at possibly eliminating the utility allowance altogether. We didn't do that, and we have chosen so far not to do that. Back to the change fatigue. We don't want to fatigue our families by making a change and then changing it and changing it and changing it. That being said, that kind of seems counterintuitive to what MTW is all about, right? MTW is a place where agencies can try new things, but you must be really thoughtful about what you're trying first so that you're not constantly changing it, because then you're just going to confuse people over and over and over again. So the example that I wanted to use was our 26.5% of gross income towards rent. We found in our impact analysis that it would positively impact 75% of our current participants and negatively affect 25% of them, which is where the hardship policy comes in, right? Your households are in the program. They're not asking for a change. They're not asking for a transition to something new. We did it we transitioned everybody at their annual research that first year, but we did our rent calculation is now 26.5% of gross income towards rent. So we eliminated all the medical deductions, the $400 allowance for elderly and disabled families. We also, by doing that, we had a lot of families who were claiming a lot of medical deductions. And so their portion of the rent was going to change dramatically. And so we did implement a hardship system. The reason we eliminated all the deductions, and this is just an example of the why we did this, and we firmly believe that our scarce, limited housing dollars should not subsidize the broken healthcare system in this country. That should be for the healthcare industry to figure out, not the housing industry to take care of. Some of our folks were very, very upset by that. We implemented this activity back in 2012. We had quite a few people fall into the hardship category, and we, to this day, still have 6 folks who are still benefiting from the hardship policy. But it's one of those things that we felt it was really important to eliminate the medical deductions for a variety of reasons. The one I mentioned about the scarce housing dollars, but also the fact that we found that there were participants who refused to share that information with us because it's private information. They didn't want to provide that information. And my staff, I'm sure like yours, certainly we don't want to know more about our participants than we absolutely positively have to. And so it felt like we were giving back a little bit of dignity, a little bit more privacy back to our residents and participants as well. And the other 75-25 rule was also, we implemented that as well according to the program. We made sure that it was not going to cost the program any extra money. And we also wanted to make sure that we kept our rent burden right around 30%. So that's all I had prepared to tell you. Are there any questions in the chat?
Are there any questions for Karen? Karen, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Any questions for Karen on anything that she said? A lot of outstanding firsthand direct experience on doing these and why it's important to do an impact analysis. So one question, Karen, I see, how often do you have forums with participants?
So anytime that we are thinking of a new activity, that is when we start pulling together the folks who are going to be affected. For example, in 2020, the activity that we put forth to HUD was specific to our FSS rent calculation and the escrow calculation, and we have a very small FSS program. So we met with our current FSS participants and made sure that they understood, and we heard their impact, we heard their concerns, we heard their enthusiasm, we heard their suggestions, their ideas. And so we really only do it when we are actually looking at an activity. And I know I think there was a question in the chat about like, when do you do the impact analysis? We've learned that we do the impact analysis way up front. Like we're a January 1st to December 31st fiscal year. And so our annual plan is due to HUD by October 15th. If we're going to implement or propose any new activities, we start thinking about those usually in February or March. We let our board know because we don't ever want to run too far down the road before the board says, yes, keep running, or nope, we want you to go backwards or left or right or something like that. So we've done a lot of the impact analysis up front, like way up front. So, you know, make sure that we do it way up front. We do our impact analysis in a level usually in like June or July. By September, our final draft plan is going to the board. And so that is when we would, that's when we would go ahead and share, really in-depth analysis. But our impact analysis is done in advance. We want to make sure that the activity is going to do what we want it to do, and that it's going to be it's going to be successful, right? I'm a type A personality. I'm a D on the DISC scale. I think everybody can tell that already. I hate failure, and I like to make sure that things are going to work out pretty much to the way I think they're going to. So, and yes, I think my email address was on that last slide, and I am definitely open to anybody can email me, ask me questions. We can set up a time for conversation. MTW is the reason I get up in the morning. MTW is my baby. It is what makes my job so enjoyable. And I've been at BHP for 18 years, and we've been with the MTW program since 2012. So it's some super exciting stuff for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of work, but super exciting stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
There's another question for you. What software do you use?
We currently have Yardi. That's another thing to remember in your change. When you're doing your impact analysis, when we decided we wanted to do the rent reform, we started having those conversations with Yardi way in advance, because they have to have time to, one, understand what you're doing, and then two, implement it. A lot of MTW agencies are already using Yardi, and so we were able to use some of the stuff that other agencies had put together. We had made the incorrect assumption that some of the other agencies had also made changes to the FSS escrow calculation, and they hadn't, and it took us almost 9 months. Granted, it was during the pandemic to get those changes into place in Yardi. So always, that's another thing that at first we weren't really thinking about, but it is definitely something to think about. You don't want your staff doing calculations on an Excel spreadsheet by hand. You want to be able to have your system be able to do that.
Thank you.
In response to Kathleen Gallagher's question about EID, we did eliminate the earned income disallowance.
Okay.
And I don't know if I mean, we're an original 39 agency, so I don't know if that's something the new agencies can do or not, but we have.
So we need to look in the ops notice to see if it's an MTW waiver. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but even if it's not an MTW waiver, they can propose it as an agency-specific waiver if it's not in there in ops notice.
And then there's a question from Monica White. Sorry, there's a question from Monica White too. Is our entire agency an MTW agency? So we have special purpose vouchers that are the operational flexibilities through MTW are allowed to be applied to them, but not the funding flexibility. We also have public housing. We have project-based rental assistance contracts through the multifamily division of HUD, which do not fall under the MTW. And then we have a whole lot of affordable units and tax credit units that do not necessarily fall under MTW specifically.
Okay. Thank you. And to go back to the last question about EID, Allison read the option. We don't all have it memorized, so we got to go look at it ourselves, and y'all need to get more familiar with it. But it is in there already, waiving the EID as an MTW waiver. I'm not sure which one it is. Read the ops notice to find out. And if there's any safe harbors around it, read the ops notice to find out what those are as well. Yeah, and HOTMA, so I think, HOTMA's coming. So, or the implementation of HOTMA is coming as well. But until that happens, take a look at what's in the ops notice. EID is in there, and more information is in the Appendix 1. So with that, I'm going to thank you, Karen. Thank you so much.
And
I always enjoy hearing your.
Thanks. And I'm still here. Yeah, I'm going to stick around in case there's any questions.
So we are going to have one more question, and then we're going to test some knowledge. This question came to me directly, and I'm going to ask it so that everybody can hear the same thing, and I'm going to ask Allison, this one's for you. So this one is specifically, I think, for Cohort 1 agencies. It was mentioned that Cohort 1 and 2 have a research partner. My housing authority is in Cohort 1. Will someone from MTW reach out to us at a later date in regards to this, or should we have already been in contact with a research partner? Allison, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, without getting too much into the specific cohorts, just generally all the cohorts have different evaluations that are being run and all are being conducted by third-party researchers. The level of interaction that each cohort will have with the researcher is going to be very different. So it'll be, depending on the selection notice under which you were designated as MTW. So the stepped and tiered rent cohort, for example, has a very high interaction with the evaluator because they're running 2 concurrent rents, and it's a very, a high touch cohort. The MTW is a flexibility for small PHAs cohort. That's more of an observational cohort. So while the evaluator is working in the background, you might only talk with them once a year during your informational interview. So it's really dependent on what cohort you're in, and for any future cohorts that might be watching this, those research obligations will be even different. So it's really dependent on your cohort, specifically to the MTW flexibility cohort. If you go back to that, webinar we conducted on the evaluation, your role is really just that one interview a year, and then you have an optional to sit in on a webinar to hear from what the researchers have learned that year. So it's a very, like I said, low touch observational approach for that cohort.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison, and hopefully that answers that question. And we're going to try to find the link to that webinar that Allison just mentioned. It's on our HUD Exchange page, but just so that you can be reminded about what the evaluation requirements are for each of the cohorts. It's different by cohort. All right, now's the fun time. Mentimeter, let's test your knowledge. Quiz time. We have done this a couple of times, so we're kind of old hats at this, maybe not exactly. So first thing we want you to do is to pull out your phone, your smartphone, your iPad, your other smart device, and we're going to be answering some questions. So open a new browser, whether it's in Safari or Google Chrome, and go to menti.com, www.menti.com. Once you've arrived there, you will be prompted to enter a code that I believe we're putting in the chat. That code is 53271403. Again, 53271403. I'll give you a minute to do that. And if you don't have your iPhones ready, if you're not able to do this, just listen along and have fun. But hopefully you guys are able to participate. So the objective of this game is to have fun and answer the questions correctly. And the quicker you answer, the more points you get. So right now, we're going to just do a couple questions on the impact analysis, and then later we'll do a few more on the hardship policies. Okay, we are going to start with a practice. Wait a minute. We're going to start with a practice question to get everybody set up. You will be assigned a character, prompted to enter a name. Enter your name, and if you feel comfortable, you can put in your own name. If not, you can put in John Doe, Casper the Friendly Ghost, whatever you want it to be. All right. I'm seeing some fantastic looking characters joining. Yay. You know my favorite is the penguin. If you don't know, now you do. I love them. They're adorable. but I'm not allowed to have favorites on my alligator's pretty cute too. All right. Where am I? Just completely got lost. Okay, so our practice question is, look at your phone. Question is, are you ready to play? Look at your phone, type in the right answer, or type in the correct answer, which is yes, by the way. Countdown will tell you how much time you have. Time's up. And yes. All right, perfect. Everybody's ready. Yay, or at least the 55 people that are choosing to play are ready. So awesome. Fantastic. So for all of the other questions, first I'm going to read the question aloud, and then you'll get the message saying, you know, and then the timer will start and you'll be able to quickly answer the question. All right. So, ready? Let's get started. Question number 1. Which of the following is not a required factor to consider when completing an impact analysis? Which is not a required factor to consider when completing an impact analysis? A, impact on agency's finances. B, impact on an agency's termination rate of families. C, impact of residents' ability to earn a higher income. Or D, impact on meeting the MTW statutory objectives. Again, the question is, which is not required when completing the impact analysis? A, impact on agency's finances. B, impact on termination rate of families. C, impact on residents' ability to earn a higher income. Or D, impact on meeting the MTW statutory objectives. Time's up. And the answer is, well done, you guys. Fantastic. The correct answer is C, impact on the residents' ability to earn a higher income. So as Tanisha told us, or Jenny, I'm sorry, sorry guys, forget who said this piece. The Appendix 2 of the operations notice spells out the 9 factors to consider, and the impact of the residents' ability to earn a higher income is not one of the required factors to consider. The others that were listed here are. So well done. Good job, you guys. Good job. Next question. Ready? True or false? A single impact analysis can be done for multiple activities. True or false? A single impact analysis can be done for multiple activities. Take a look at your phone. True or false? A single impact analysis can be done for multiple activities. Good job. The correct answer is true, that if you have one impact analysis, it may cover several different activities if they're related. So it is true that one impact analysis can be done for multiple activities. So well done. Number 3. Tough one. When is an impact analysis required for agency-specific waivers? A, prior to implementation. B, annually during implementation. C, at closeout. Or D, it depends. Again, the question is, when is an impact analysis required for agency-specific waivers? A, prior to implementation. B, annually during implementation. C, at closeout. Or D, it depends. Okay, so it's about 50-50. The answer is it depends, and this one is a little tough. So those that answered A, prior to implementation, 100% correct, right? Yes, it has to be done prior to implementation, but it also, while it's not all not all agency-specific waivers may be required annually or throughout. It's possible, depending on what your activity is, your agency-specific activity is, if it's one of those like high-impact activities similar to work requirements or time limits has a really strong impact on families, it's possible that an impact analysis may be required annually. And then another thing, which I believe Tanisha covered, is any activity that required a impact analysis implementation also requires the impact analysis at closeout. So just as a reminder on that one. So outstanding to those of you 25. It's a little bit of a tricky one, so that's but good job for those of you that got that right, and hopefully that helps clear it up. Is there another one? One more, another true or false. If an impact analysis is not required, your agency should not do one. Again, true or false. If an impact analysis is not required, your agency should not do one. True or false? Time's up. Good job. Way to go. That's correct. Just because it's not required doesn't mean you can't do it. As for all of the reasons that Jenny and Karen and Tanisha had mentioned, you might want to do it anyway, even if it's not required for the operations notice. It's up to you within your agencies if it makes the most sense to do one for another activity that's where it may not be required. So good job. All right. So hopefully, oh wait, do we still? Let's check out the leaderboard. Dragonite choo-choo. Oh my goodness, what's going on? Good job. There is some tough competition up there at the top. Dragonite, choo-choo, Joan, like just a few points seems to be separating the leaderboard. So we'll see when we come back and do this again after the hardship policy piece, maybe it'll open up a little bit, or maybe that gap will narrow. We'll find out. All right. So thank you guys so much for participating. Hope you enjoyed that. Just another way to think about the information, get it into the brain cells so they can absorb. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And with that, it's about 3:05. Let's take a break. Let's take a, what do we want to say? 3:05. Can we come back here at maybe just 5 minutes? Is that enough? Do you guys want more? You can yell at me. Let's take a break. Come back here at 3:10. And I don't know, Laura, if I'm like throwing you off. I am, because I don't think we had a break slide in the slides. But if we want to just take a few minutes to just take a break, grab some water, let the impact analysis information absorb into your brain to make room for the hardship policies, which we'll get started off when we come back. So we will see you guys back here in about 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Talking to myself over here. I'll unmute my phone. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully that 5 minutes was enough time for your brain cells to absorb all that information that we provided on impact analysis. So the related piece of that, also in Appendix 2, is the hardship policies. And so for that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Christensen to kind of talk through the hardship policies. Allison, take it away.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Marianne. Thanks everybody for joining us. Going to touch base on hardship policies here. So hit that next slide, please. Great, thank you. So hardship policies, similar to the impact analyses, we like to point you in the direction of some resources that we've made available. You'll notice with a lot of these trainings, we have information that is presented the same information in different ways. So we hope that, one of the ways that you access the information will be helpful to you. Sometimes you might want, just a one-sheet job aid. Sometimes you might want to watch a video to have it explained more fully. So just to point out those resources here, the first one we always point to, of course, is the good old trusty MTW operations notice. So that's where we always point you to first, is the source material. So here you'll find the hardship policies discussed in Appendix 2 of the MTW operations notice. So it's way down at the end. You'll see the information that I'm presenting today on hardship policies. There's also a hardship policies section of the MTW expansion training online manual. There's a number of slides there that take you through some examples of how agencies put together hardship policies. There's also an interactive training that you can take that shows you the development of some hardship policies and how to apply those to specific household members. So that could be a useful tool for you or even your staff who are going to be on the front lines applying these hardship policies. So we hope you find those are useful, and they are available as always on our HUD website at www.hud.gov/MTW. If you go to the expansion section of the website, all these resources are available to you. I'd also like to note here, in the question came up a little bit earlier about the specific cohort you're in and how that might interact with some of this information. For the stepped and tiered rent cohort specifically, there are some hardship policy intricacies that you're dealing with as a part of your rent programs. So just to note here that you'll need to continue to work with the evaluator and the other agencies in your cohort in developing those hardship policies, because you might have some more specific information related to your cohort that you might need to follow that we won't discuss here today, since this is more just generally on hardship policies. So just wanted to point out that there might be some things you need to pay attention to there that are specific to your rent model, to your cohort. But for the remainder of the MTW activities that you're thinking of implementing, this will be how you'll approach hardship policies as well. Next slide, please. So some key things to know. Again, the operations notice, Appendix 2, page 66. So the hardship policy information in the operations notice is not too meaty. I think it's only a page, maybe a page and a half of information to look at. So it's all right there for you in the operations notice, and useful to look at before you get started with developing these policies. And what is a hardship policy? It's really used to determine when a requirement of an MTW activity constitutes a financial or other hardship. So it's a organized way for you all to think about the impacts that your MTW activities are having on residents and your households and your programs. So this is similar to impact analyses as well. You can use one hardship policies for multiple MTW waivers and associated activities, or develop a different policy for different MTW waivers. And we leave that up to the agency on what makes sense for you all and how to implement that. So you might have a comprehensive rent reform that invokes many different MTW waivers and associated activities. You would choose to have maybe one hardship policy associated with all that, umbrella of different policies and activities, which is totally fine. You might have a work requirement or something like that, where you might choose to have a specific hardship policy that addresses just that activity. It's up to the agency. We leave it up to you to organize those hardship policies however you think make the most sense. Another important key thing to know is the communication of the hardship policy with your residents and households. So it's very important for you to communicate these policies to the households that you serve, and a requirement of the hardship policy is that it's reviewed with residents during intake and recertification. So we hear a lot of times that these hardship policies are available but not being accessed by families. So we want the agency to take a real role in communicating the hardship policies to their families, so that if those families are in need of that hardship policy, it's something that they know about ahead of time and they're able to access when they need it, as opposed to after the fact, not knowing that it was available. So we really think that that's important to, continue to communicate with your residents, and indeed it's required at least at intake and recertification. So where do you submit these hardship policies? Similar again to the impact analysis, it's included as an attachment to the MTW supplement to the annual PHA plan. So you'll upload that into the system just as you would the other attachments that may be required. make sure the hardship policy is clear and easy to understand. And again, families know how to access it, because when a family is in need of a hardship policy, you know, it could be a turbulent time in a household family's life. So we want that to be there for them if they need it, and to know that it's there and easy for them to understand. So it's an important element. Another aspect that's required by the hardship policy section of the operations notice is that there's a grievance procedure. So there's a second layer of review if a hardship request is denied, just as a best practice to you know, ensure that the policy is being applied consistently and it's having more than just one set of eyes looking at it. So you need to build that grievance procedure into your hardship policy. So those are some key things to know. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what situations must hardship policy include? And these are right in the operations notice as well. There's really three main situations that we want you all to think about as you're creating these hardship policies. The first is if there's a decrease in income because of changed circumstances. So there's a job loss, there's a change in family composition, or a death in the family. Maybe they didn't lose their job, but they're down on hours. So there's a decrease in income. That needs to be addressed in the hardship policy. Another situation that could afford a family's ability to pay their rent is an increase in expenses. So that's the other side of the coin there because of changed circumstances. So there's some examples of what these could be: medical costs, childcare, transportation, education, or maybe some other circumstances that might be specific to your community. But you need to look at that. Both of those situations, a decrease in income or an increase in expenses, those both need to be addressed somehow in your hardship policy when required. And then we have the third category here, which is sort of a catch-all. So we never like to think that we've anticipated every creative activity that an agency can come up with, or every, you know, we don't presume to know every circumstance that could arise. So we leave this other situations and factors that the agency determines is appropriate. So perhaps you're having those great community engagement sessions, and somebody in one of those sessions brings up a possible situation that could be a hardship because of a policy you're implementing. Wanted to give the agency space to address these other situations that may not be financial or may not meet, you know, discreetly into these two factors. Wanted those to be able to be addressed in a hardship policy as well. Okay, next slide, please. So now we're going to get into some examples. So we're going to look at an example hardship policy and an example hardship, and we're going to take you through the process that's in the interactive training. So this will maybe look familiar to some of you who have already taken that. And if you haven't taken that, then it's a little preview. You'll probably do well on the tests and interactive training if you take a look at that. So here we have an example hardship policy. We have, this is from the agency's point of view, so you can see in the cutout there that they're addressing decreases in income and increases in expenses. So you can see that pop out there that if the household income is reduced by 10% or more for 30 or more days, that constitutes a hardship. And if a household expenses increases by 10% for 30 or more days because of those following factors, then that will constitute a hardship. And you can see some of the other factors as well related to exceeding 40% of monthly gross income for a total tenant payment, for the facing eviction for non-payment of rent, or the head of household has a full-time responsibility for care of a child or disabled adult or minor. So you can see those are some other non-financial factors that the agency has opted to include as an example of what constitutes a hardship at their agency. So next slide, please. And here we have the process overview that, again, I mentioned is in that training. And this just sort of helps you break down the hardship policy process into more discrete steps so that you meet all the requirements and you're thinking about this in a kind of linear fashion. So the first of the steps is to develop the hardship policy. So you identify the situations that constitute a financial or other hardship. So we just reviewed those on the other slide, right? That's that change in income, the increase in expenses, things like that. You're identifying the situations and defining what the hardship actually is. So that's the develop process. Next is the notify process. So this is where you're letting your residents know, making the policy available should any household ever need to access it. So you implement a plan where residents are getting notified of the hardship policy at intake and recertification, which is required by the operations notice. And also another time when it's required by the operations notice is when assistance is to be terminated due to an MTW activity. So at all those points, the household is required to be notified of what the hardship policy is. The next step is to review and determine. So this is where you're actually applying whether a hardship exists. So here you'll determine whether scenarios that come up with your household qualify as hardships. And then this is where the grievance procedure will be invoked as well if a hardship request should be denied. So next is implement. So here, what do we do if a hardship does apply? What do you do next? So you outline the courses of action. If you've identified that a hardship does exist with the household, what happens next? So you identify barriers and protections requiring reasonable accommodations, and you outline what exactly happens if there is a hardship in the household and how the MTW activity or policy might change in that event. And finally, this is also required by the MTW operations notice. You need to record all of your hardship requests and the outcomes. So that's a requirement that's in there as well. So as you get started with an activity, first you'll attach the hardship policy to the MTW supplement to the PHA plan. And then in future years, as you're implementing the activity, you're going to be, it's going to be asked in the supplement for information on just how many hardships did you receive and what did you do about those. And the hope is that if you see, hardships accumulating in certain areas, then you can maybe adjust the MTW policy to maybe maneuver those a different way if they're in an unexpected fashion. So, next slide, please. Great. So finally, what we're going to do here, we're going to take that initial hardship policy that I spoke about before, that 10% change in income, or the 10% drop in income, or the 10% increase in expenses, and we're going to apply that to a specific situation. So here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Marcus. And you can see here we have the different steps of the process on the bottom of the screen here. So we're just going to take you through those. So Marcus's story. Marcus has recently lost his job as at a fast food restaurant because he missed too many days of work due to minor illnesses. Without the income from his job, he is unable to meet the minimum rent requirement for his apartment. Now, after being terminated from his job at the fast food restaurant, Marcus took an opportunity to do something he's always wanted to do, to begin a career in public safety. So he applied for a spot in a 12-week training program to become a security guard. He was accepted and he began immediately. So during those 12 weeks that he's in the training program, Marcus will not be able to meet the minimum rent requirement to the programs. He's only getting a small stipend on the program. However, when he successfully completes the training program, he will be provided with a paid internship and eventually will transition to a full-time position. So how does, Marcus's situation apply to the agency's hardship policy that we looked at before? So the first step is that the agency developed a hardship policy in the first place. So Marcus is on a specific type of MTW activity with regard to his rent. Before the agency implemented that activity, they established that hardship policy that we looked at before, and it meets both of the requirements of that change of income and the increase of expenses. So there's a provision in that, so that meets the requirements of the hardship policy. So they've already developed that. Next is the notification of residents. So here, we know that Marcus, when he came onto the program, he was notified of this hardship policy. So he knows that he can request an exemption and be considered for one of those as defined by the established policy. And he would have been told about that both when he entered the program and if he's had any recertification since then. So he's gone through that notify step as well. Next, we have the review and determine step. So this is where we look specifically at Marcus's situation and apply the hardship policy. So in fact, here a hardship does exist. It's considered whether, according to the policy, it's okay for Marcus to choose to enter the training rather than to find another fast food job where he would earn what he was earning before to pay the minimum rent. So it's considered whether and when Marcus would return to full-time employment after his training, as well as the other factors that might have an effect. So here, Marcus's income is going down, which is acknowledged. So that does meet the term of the hardship policy. And maybe his expenses are going up too. There's nothing in the fact pattern about that, but perhaps, you know, there's materials or other transportation costs that are different as a part of the training program. So those would be considered as a part of the hardship. So the agency here determined that, yes, there is a hardship. There's a change in expenses and there's a change in income. So Marcus does qualify for a hardship as he's pursuing this self-sufficiency opportunity. So the agency has implemented a course of action that would reprieve Marcus from meeting the minimum rent requirement and re-examine his situation in 6 months once he's completed the training and internship program. So they have looked at his situation and implemented a solution that will hopefully work. So that brings us to the record step, which is the last step. So the agency would use its data system. So they have some way of recording the hardship that has occurred here with Marcus. And they are going to record the data from his hardship request and examine it along with the other requests to see patterns in their policy, to make sure they're addressing the areas where they want to address, and to make sure they're applying the hardship policy in a consistent manner across households. So this analysis of the recording phase would affect how they might adjust policies in the future if needed. So that is Marcus's situation as applied to the hardship policy that we looked at there. And I think Marianne might have another quiz for us on this information.
I sure do. Thank you, Allison. So that was, again, a lot of information. So let's test the knowledge here, and then we'll open it up to questions. But one more opportunity for Mentimeter quiz time. I think it was like Boo Boo or Choo Choo or somebody was at the top the last time. Let's see how that goes. So again, get out your phones, type in the mentimeter.com, MENTI. And in case you lost it on your phones, John, could you put the code back in just in case people need it? The menti.com, entering code 53271403. Hopefully we're still all in there from the last time. All right, let's ready to go. Question number 5. What is the first step in the hardship policy process? To develop, to record, to notify, or to implement? Again, what is the first step in the hardship policy process? A is develop. I need to pull it up. I don't have, I lost my cheat sheet, so I'm sorry, guys. Hang on a second. Where'd it go? I'm too late. Couldn't help you. Sorry. Doesn't matter. You didn't need me. You all got it 100% right. Way to go. Yay. So develop, to identify what it might be, and to develop. And that was part of the list that Allison went through. So really well done. Thank you, guys. Next question. And I've got my cheat sheet in hand, so I'm not going to mess it up this time. Number 6, true or false? An agency may develop a single hardship policy that applies to multiple MTW waivers and associated activities, or different hardship policies for different MTW waivers. Question, true or false? An agency may develop a single hardship policy that applies to multiple waivers and activities, or they can develop different hardship policies for different waivers. True or false? And all right, I think this may be our first 100% accurate. So good job, everybody. 43 out of 43. Well done. All right, last question. the MTW agency must include its hardship policy as an attachment to what? The MTW supplement to the annual PHA plan, the impact analysis, or the consolidated plan. Again, the agency must include its hardship policy as an attachment to what? The MTW supplement to the annual PHA plan, B, the impact analysis, or C, the consolidated plan. And the answer is, almost 100%. That is correct. It must be included as an attachment to the supplement, the MTW supplement to the PHA plan. Thank you. A good job. Let's see where we are. This was outstanding on this one. You guys did great. There's Choo Choo and Joan, Liz. What's going on with all these numbers? Choo Choo, way to go. Choo Choo, good job. 76, 55 points. That absolutely means nothing to me, but you came in the first. So congratulations. I don't know if you can see that confetti that's going on the screen there. So very well done, and really well done to all of you. That was a lot of, just a little, again, a different way to present the information to keep those synapses firing in our brains to make sure that we're absorbing it. So again, Allison, thank you so much for your overview of that. And so now let's see if there are any questions. And as always, please enter any questions. You can put them in the chat. If you put them in the chat, make sure that you, in the to, make sure it's to everyone or to at least to the panelists so we can see your questions. Or if you want to talk, which would be great to hear your voices, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly. I see a question to everyone from Christian Rolfe. Has anyone in this group used SACS, Scott Accounting, to obtain data for their impact analysis? So I can't speak to that, but I think that's for others. I think you can answer each other in the chat or take yourself off mute. Not seeing a lot of takers there. Christian, do you want to come off mute and explain your question a little bit better?
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, sure. Hello.
Okay, I know that someone had said, no, one of the presenters stated that she used Yardi. Most people use Yardi, but our agency currently uses SACS. And so I just wanted to, because we are trying to get some of the data and the numbers for our impact analysis, we wanted to know if anyone else in this group uses SACS.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Others in the group?
Or maybe if Kristen, maybe put your email in the chat there, and then if any folks have some experience with that, they can get in touch with you. Maybe that would be a way to do it as well.
Okay, so maybe Monica and Christian, you guys can connect over the using of the SACS system. Are there any other questions relating to hardship policies, impact analysis questions for our presenters, for Karen especially? Great, thanks. Look, we just made a connection here on the MTW webinar. That's awesome. Thanks, Monica. Any other questions for any of the presenters? Let me scroll up here just to make sure I'm not missing anything. So there's a comment here about for the impact analysis, it would be helpful to have an example of what it looks like. We hear you, and we will take that back and see what we can find it, whether it's something that we've already seen or something that we can develop as like a template example.
And I saw a similar question about that on the hardship policy. So I'd really recommend that you take that interactive training on the hardship policy, because there's a number of sample hardship policies in there that then you actually go through the process of reading the hardship policy and then applying it to a situation. So if you're looking for examples on those, they're available to you there.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. Wanted to circle back on the impact analysis. And I'm going to ask Jenny, if you still have power. Question, I'm going to kind of circle back to, there she is, circle back to the question of, so it sounds like the impact analysis, that the impact is considered after implementation, but the application or the supplement, you're required to update the impact analysis in advance. When is it actually done? If you can explain that, tease that out a little bit.
Sure. So when you're contemplating an activity and you're putting that in your supplement, you're looking at the impacts on the current participants that you have. So you can look at who you're serving in your public housing, who you're serving in your voucher program. And if you were to put that in place, that activity or that proposal that you have, what would the impact be on the current individuals that you are serving? So that's that prior to implementation part. And I think that's really important, because it does tell you, hey, if we do this, is it gonna have the effect we're looking for or that we would like to see? And then, as Tanisha talked about, is it required on an annual basis? When is it required? I would say, frankly, when you start when you start putting these activities or these proposals in place, it's not bad to go ahead and rerun it so you can see what's happening, because you might have a knowledge of what something happened to this family or that one, but just overall with your program, what's happening, and it does inform. So that impact analysis and those different items that are noted, you can often run those things out of as we were talking about, your different systems. I know in the past we set up some crystal reports to run specific questions out to see what has happened or what had happened after we had implemented an activity. But it's a way to see that and project forward. And as your program changes, you're going to have new families in your program, and that may have a different outcome than what you initially did prior to implementing. So it continues to inform, and that's why it's important too, I think, to keep those records so you can do a comparative analysis with those reports. Does that clarify, I hope?
Yes. Thank you, Jenny. Are there any other questions relating to that? Great. So I got a yes, thank you. That answers our question. And there's a comment in here, like, I'd be interested in seeing any of the spreadsheets or templates that Karen used to develop the impact analysis if possible. So I defer to Karen on whether you're comfortable sharing that information, but also, as Allison noted, to send you back to that training that we have developed on the impact analysis and the hardship policy, and HUD Exchange has some good information there as well. But Karen, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. Whoops. Yeah, can you hear me? I'm still here. I'd be more than happy to share like spreadsheets that we've set up, but it's not like we use one template for each impact analysis, because it depends on what impact you're trying to analyze, right? And so it's something that we create each and every time. We do a lot of, work inside of Excel so that we can manipulate the data. We can, look at different variables, and that pushes out different summaries and such like that. But I'd be more than happy to share, an example of one that we've used in the past if anybody wants to just shoot me an email, and I think my email it's in the PowerPoint.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks so much, Karen.
Absolutely.
Are there other questions, comments? Okay. So I'm going. Okay, so I'm going to kind of start transitioning to the closing slides as I'm talking. Perfect. Thank you. I knew I started too soon. Well, question. So this, I'm going to send this back to Jenny. Is this a correct timeline? You pick the waivers. You gather the impact analysis. You file the PHA plan and the MTW supplement. And then when it's approved, we notify the residents of the changes and implement. So nothing really starts until after the approval.
Bottom line, I would say yes, but of course I would be talking to your residents and your participants all along the way prior to even submitting and doing your impact, or do it alongside. But it's important to keep them informed, and that keeping them informed includes when you are going to begin implementation. So, you're looking at, you need to get that approval first before you can actually start implementing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, perfect. And I think the one additional step I would add is don't forget to update your ACOP and admin plans with your updated MTW policies.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah. Great. Another question. When quantitative data is not available for the impact analysis, the agency's been using qualitative data in the hopes of gathering quantitative data after implementation. Is that okay? I guess, Jenny,
Sure.
on that, or Karen, based on your experience?
I'm sort of not sure about why, if you can collect the information after implementation, that you couldn't collect it and look at it before. Quantitative is always, in my mind, important, because these are individuals in households. These are people we're talking about. There's a lot of black and white data we can look at, but bottom line, you're talking about a person. So I think that is important, and I think that's really important as an agency to be thinking about, and that is not something to be ignored. But the quantitative data feels like it should be there before and after, and you can run a lot of different scenarios based on the information, the quantitative data that you have. In my mind, a lot of it leads back to when you're talking about rent. And if I change this number here, what will be the effect? If we implement a higher minimum rent, or if we, what are the things we're proposing possibly, that you can do a lot of those things within Excel. Tends to be a really easy program to work with. I'm not promoting Microsoft Excel, but it is a program that a lot of us are used to working with, and you can do a lot of that. So I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question otherwise.
Yeah. Can I ask the questioner if you're comfortable coming off mute and kind of describing the situation a little bit better?
Yeah, so our company is mostly paper, not paperless. So we have a lot of information missing from our systems that we can't get right now, but we're hoping to implement different data gathering system later. So right now we're going through with our case managers and just getting their experience. Like most of them have been working here for 20 plus years, so they know their clients really well. So we've just been asking them questions and trying to figure out more information about our clients that way until we can gather that data.
I would try to get, if you don't have it in, I'm familiar with going paperless in the work, but I'll just say one of the challenges that staff often laughed about was that they would collect all this paper, it would all be scanned into the system, so it was all stored electronically, but then they would shred all the paper they collected, and so it felt like it was not that they ever went paperless eventually. Maybe you are, but there was so much collected, it became a running joke. I'm not saying yours is, but this was a challenge. But that information is put into the system, and it's uploaded to HUD. So somewhere there's got to be some information, and I'm wondering if you don't have it in your local database anymore, is it something that can be downloaded from the PIC system and then analyzed from there?
The information we're specifically looking at is that we want to implement activity that would only affect households with students and young adults, and we don't currently track student status on our online systems.
Okay. So in your system, but what you upload to HUD does have an indicator if someone in the household is a full-time student.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's some way to work backwards. There might be
But Jennifer, that's only if they're over the age of 18 and a full-time adult or a full-time student, right? Otherwise, they're just listed as a youth on the 50058. Just a thought for you, and I don't know how strong your relationship is with your school district. We have a very close relationship with our local school district, and there may be a possibility of sharing. If you share the addresses, can they tell you if somebody in the household's a student or not, depending on what age of the student that you're trying to target?
Yeah, we hadn't thought about that. Thanks, Karen.
We work with our partners a lot, and we depend on them for a lot of information and feedback on our MTW stuff.
Yeah, and this is a good example. What we're talking about today is, best practices, how to set up the best impact analysis and hardship policy that you can, that is informed by data. We understand that some of these questions, on MTW statutory requirements, you might not have data on things that you weren't expecting to need data on. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg sort of thing. So the MTW operations notice does offer flexibility in the types of data that you provide. So I think definitely a best practice with the quantitative data, but where maybe it's something towards a statutory objective that's a little bit looser, or something like you said on types of households that you don't have information for yet, or members of households that you don't have information for yet. Just fill in the gaps. Remember, this is a public-facing document that's meant to address the impacts that you anticipate for your activity. So you want to make clear what you have, the information that you have, and the information that you're basing your policy on, and make sure that's defensible. And then you do your best to set up an ongoing mechanism to ensure the activity is doing what you have anticipated it to do. So there could be potential holes in data. You might not be able to address every single element with a spreadsheet and hard data that might not be possible, and we understand that.
Great. Thanks. Thanks so much for the question. That was a good one, and thanks, Jenny and Karen and Allison. Thanks for that response. Any other questions? Okay. Now, as I move into the closing slides, I would like to hear from you guys whether, and you can tell us now in the chat, or actually you can tell me verbally, like how best can we support you all as we move forward? Is there any, hopefully these webinars, you found them helpful, there will be more, but if there's anything that we can do to best, we heard, the suggestion of having the draft impact analysis and hardship policy, and I think some of that is already available in that training. Anything else that we can do to best support you guys as the rubber is now starting to hit the road with your MTW flexibilities? please let us know. Please, you can put comments in the chat. You can send us an email, talk to your field office. Just let us know how we can best support you as we move forward. And with that, actually, any thoughts off the top of your head before I go on? Karen.
I just want to throw out the appreciation that I and my team have for the MTW office staff. You all have just been amazing. You're always open to the curious, random, weird, strange questions. To be completely and totally honest and frank, we were always taught previous to MTW that if you didn't know the answer, don't ask HUD. You needed to know the answer before you asked them for clarification or kind of confirmation of the answer. And I have found that that is not the attitude to take with the MTW office, because I think we're all just trying to do the best that we can in this guinea pig program, demonstration program that we are participating in. And I have always found the MTW staff to be super helpful. And if you're thinking about, oh, gosh, it'd be really fun to do this idea, throw it out to your MTW point of contact at the MTW office, and they'll be able to come back and say, oh yeah, this agency's tried that, or this agency has done this, or this agency has something similar. And that's other just really great advice. You do not have to recreate the wheel, right? There are 39 of us who have been doing this for a while. We have learned sometimes the hard way on some of our stuff. And again, remember that what works in Boulder may not work in wherever you are all from, but what works there may not work for me, but it may work. And so to always just be reaching out. We're a great group of folks from the agency side and the MTW agent or HUD side, and just use the resources available. You're not alone in this at all. So please reach out. I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you. And that was not a paid advertisement. So thanks, Karen. And I'll just say the same goes with our field offices as well. As we move forward with the expansion, we've really made a concerted effort to bring in the field offices. And so we've been, you've all been working very closely with your field offices and kind of getting, as you're putting together your supplements. And so, HUD is here to assist and support, and just let us know. The great thing about MTW is the purpose of MTW is to help you addressing the local, your local community's concerns in the way that makes the best sense for your community. And MTW is a pool to do that. And so, please let us know, let your field office know if you have any questions at all. So thanks for that. And I see that there are some comments in the chat about if people know of consultants that are helpful. And obviously, as an MTW staff, I can't answer that question, right? We can't recommend one over another, so you guys can talk amongst yourselves. But I will say that we've developed the supplement in a way to hopefully make it not that complicated, right? The goal in developing was it to be simple, to be able to know what you're doing and to put that information in. And if you have questions, that's what we are here to support with, the field offices, HUD, the various trainings that we've had. And with the writing and developing the impact analysis hardship policies, I think there's some really good examples out training that we've provided on the online tool, and so hopefully that'll help you get started. So it's not too much of an effort. It's important, but hopefully we provided some materials to help you get started. And I do see some more. I'm not going to. Yeah, you guys can talk amongst yourselves when it comes to consultants. Anything else? Okay, so next slide. A couple resources, right? We've hammered home today the Operations Notice Appendix 2. So it's 2 pages, and it's just talks about what those requirements are. And then we also have on the MTW Online Manual, we have training specific to the impact analysis and hardship policies that you can go back You'll be able to rewatch this video, you'll be able to watch those, and we'll be able to answer a lot of the questions that have come up. So definitely everything needs to be grounded in the operations notice, and the online manual should provide that as well. This next one I am super excited about. We rolled it out, I think it was yesterday, it's on the website. We have, and I was talking with one of the agencies, the new agencies yesterday. They're like, you guys have like a one-pager that just pulls it all together, all this information that you've been providing. It's been a lot. That's what this is. It's a, it's basically, well, it's not a one-pager. It was giving me a lot of information. It's like a 2 to 3 pager of everything that you need to know as you're becoming MTW, from the very beginning, getting that ACC amendment executed until submitting the supplement and everything that comes from there. And it links to the various places, the various resources that we've already talked about on the website, the HUD Exchange, the webinars that we've had. And so we're really excited about this tool. We're hopeful that it's, again, same information, different way. Hopefully this will be helpful. Know if it is, let us know if there would be something else that would be helpful as well. So thanks so much for our partners at ICF for putting that together. Next slide. We will see you on November 3rd for the MTW Funding and Special Purpose Vouchers webinar. Woohoo! Philip Plus and team are putting together a great training. We've got some guest stars from some of the other offices. Our favorite Jerry Turlington, Executive Director of Housing Innovations, Inc. will be making an appearance. So we're looking forward to that. You should have already received the registration for that. So we'll see you in a couple weeks on the November 3rd webinar on digging in a little deeper on MTW funding. And with that, next slide, just want to say thanks. Thanks so much for your time today. Some great questions. As a reminder, this video, like all of them, will be available on that HUD Exchange website. That'll be there. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to your local field office. And then, of course, we're here as well if there's any questions. So thank you guys so much. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on November 3rd. Thanks, everybody.